There's a unique kind of vulnerability that comes with getting into a stranger's car. We do it all the time now. A few taps on a screen, and a car appears, a name and a face on our phone promising a safe ride home. We place our trust, our very safety, into the hands of someone we've never met, guided by a thin, digital veil of security. We assume the person behind the wheel is just like us, trying to make a living, heading to the end of their shift. But what happens when that assumption is wrong? What happens when the person you've trusted to get you from point A to point B has a completely different destination in mind for you? Tonight, we're not talking about bad ratings or rude drivers. We're delving into something much darker. These are 4 stories from people who got into an Uber and stepped into a nightmare. These accounts are inspired by real events, moments where the convenience we take for granted dissolved into pure terror. So buckle up. The stories we're about to share are more than just cautionary tales. They're a chilling reminder that the real monsters are the ones you'd never expect. Our first story comes from a woman named Clara, a 22-year-old nursing student who was finishing a late-night shift at the hospital. For her, an Uber wasn't a luxury, it was a necessity. Her shift ended at 2 a.m., long after the city buses had stopped running. It was a routine she'd done 100 times. But on this night, routine was shattered. She calls her story The Collector. Clara ordered her ride and waited outside the hospital's brightly lit entrance. The app said her driver, a man named Marcus with a solid 4.9-star rating, was 2 minutes away in a black sedan. Everything was normal. The car pulled up, the license plate matched, and she got into the back seat, exhausted and ready for bed. "Long night?" the driver asked. His voice was pleasant enough. "The usual," Clara replied, scrolling through her phone. The first few minutes of the ride were silent, just the hum of the engine. But then Marcus started talking again, and the tone shifted. "You work at St. Michael's Hospital, huh? That's a tough job. You see a lot of things in a place like that." Clara nodded, not really wanting to engage. "It has its moments. I bet," he said. "I really respect what you do. The uniform, it's very noble." Clara glanced up. She was wearing her standard blue scrubs. It was a simple observation, but the way he said it felt off, a little too personal. She gave a weak smile in the rearview mirror and looked back at her phone. A few more minutes of silence passed. Then he spoke again. "You live over on Oak Street, right? The Tanglewood Apartments." A cold spike of adrenaline shot through Clara's exhaustion. She hadn't said where she lived. The destination was in the app. Yes, but he said it like he already knew. Like it was a fact he'd learned somewhere else. Yeah, that's the place," she said, her voice a little tighter than she wanted. "Nice complex," he continued, his eyes fixed on the road. "Very quiet. They have that little garden in the courtyard. It's lovely in the spring." Now her heart was pounding. How could he possibly know that? The garden was in the center of the U-shaped building, completely invisible from the street. You'd only know about it if you'd been inside. Have you dropped someone off there before?" she asked, trying to sound casual. He chuckled, a low, strange sound. "You could say that. I like to know the areas I drive in. It's part of providing good service." The car was now just a few blocks from her apartment. She could see the turn-off coming up, but the driver slowed down, and instead of taking the turn, he drove straight past it. "Hey, my turn was back there," Clara said, sitting up straight. "Just a little detour," he said smoothly. "The app is trying to take us through that construction on Elm. I know a better way, a scenic route." There was no construction on Elm Street. She knew the route like the back of her hand. Her mind was racing. This was it. This was one of those Uber horror stories you hear about, but never think will happen to you. She gripped her phone, her thumb hovering over the 911 button in the app's safety toolkit. He turned down a dark, residential street lined with sleeping houses. It was dead quiet. He pulled the car over to the curb, turned off the engine, and the world went silent except for the frantic thumping in Clara's chest. He turned around in his seat, a wide, unnatural smile on his face. In the dim glow of a single streetlight, she could see his eyes. They were wide and intense. "I just wanted to give you this," he said, reaching into his glove compartment. Clara flinched. She was ready to bolt, to smash the window, to scream. He pulled out a small Polaroid picture and handed it to her. Her hand was trembling as she took it. The photo was of her. She was standing outside the hospital entrance, waiting, looking down at her phone. It was taken just before he had picked her up. "I like to collect things," he said, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "Mementos, for my favorite passengers. And you, Clara, you're my favorite." She didn't say a word. She threw the door open and scrambled out of the car, sprinting down the dark street without looking back. She heard his car door open, but she didn't hear footsteps. She just ran. She ran until her lungs burned, all the way to the 24-hour convenience store 3 blocks away, where she burst through the doors, sobbing and gasping for air. She reported him to Uber and the police immediately. His account was deactivated. The police took her statement, but they said without a more direct threat, there was little they could do. Marcus, the collector, was gone. But for Clara, the fear wasn't. For months, every time she saw a black sedan, her heart would leap in her throat. She never took an Uber home from work again. The photo served as a terrifying reminder of how a normal ride home can turn into a living nightmare, and how someone can watch you when you least expect it. Clara's story is a chilling example of psychological terror. The driver never laid a hand on her, but he violated her sense of safety in a profound way. It preys on the fear that we are being watched, that a stranger knows more about us than they should. It highlights the importance of trusting your gut. If a situation feels wrong, it probably is. Our second story is different. It doesn't involve a creepy driver, but rather a creepy ride. It deals with the unknown, the unexplained, and the kind of fear that lingers because you can't logically process what happened. This story comes to us from a guy named Ben, a software developer from Austin, Texas. He calls this one the glitch in the system. Ben had been out for drinks with some colleagues. It was about 1 a.m. and a storm had just rolled in, drenching the city. He did the responsible thing and called an Uber. His driver was an older woman named Carol, who pulled up in a slightly beat-up but clean minivan. Ben got in the back, and Carol greeted him with a warm, grandmotherly smile. "Nasty night out there, honey. Let's get you home and dry." Ben was relieved. She seemed perfectly normal, and he settled in for the 20-minute drive to his suburban neighborhood. The rain was coming down in sheets, and the traffic was light. They chatted pleasantly for a few minutes about the weather and their jobs. About halfway through the ride, Ben's phone, which was connected to the car's Bluetooth to play his music, suddenly disconnected. The music stopped. "Oh, that's strange," Carol said. "Sometimes my Bluetooth acts up in this weather." Ben tried to reconnect, but his phone couldn't find the car's signal. Then, he noticed the GPS on Carol's dashboard mount was frozen. The little car icon was stuck a few blocks back. "Looks like your GPS is out too," Ben said. Carol tapped the screen. "Darn technology. Good thing I know this city like the back of my hand." She seemed unconcerned, so Ben tried to relax. But then, a few moments later, the streetlights on the road ahead of them flickered and went out, plunging them into near-total darkness, save for the car's headlights cutting through the rain. "Well, that's just great," Carol muttered. "Power outage." It was at this exact moment that Ben felt a sudden, intense chill run down his spine. The air in the car grew heavy and cold, so cold he could see his breath. "Wow, your AC is powerful," he said, rubbing his arms. Carol looked at him in the rearview mirror, her friendly expression gone, replaced by one of confusion. "Honey, the heat is on full blast. It's freezing in here." She was right. He could hear the fan blowing, but the air coming out of the vents was icy. And then he heard it, a faint, electronic-sounding whisper. It seemed to be coming from the speakers, even though the radio and his phone were off. It sounded like a distorted, repeating phrase. Ben leaned forward. "Do you hear that?" Carol's eyes were wide. She nodded slowly. "What is that sound?" The whisper grew slightly louder. Ben could almost make out the words. It sounded like, "Not found, not found," over and over again. Then, things got even weirder. The GPS on the dashboard, which had been frozen, suddenly flickered back to life. But the map was gone. The screen was just a mess of corrupted, pixelated colors, and in the center, in stark white text, were the words, "Passenger not found. Rerouting. What in the world?" Carol whispered, her knuckles white on the steering wheel. Ben felt a surge of pure, primal fear. This wasn't a technical issue. Something was deeply, fundamentally wrong. "Passenger not found," he stammered. "What does that mean? I'm right here." As soon as he said the words, "I'm right here," every electronic device in the car went haywire. The dashboard lights flickered erratically, the radio blasted static at full volume, and the interior lights flashed on and off like a strobe. The whispering from the speakers turned into a high-pitched digital scream. Carol stomped on the brakes, bringing the minivan to a screeching halt in the middle of the dark road. The chaos inside the car was deafening and disorienting. Ben squeezed his eyes shut, his hands over his ears. And then, just as suddenly as it started, it stopped. Silence. The engine was dead. All the lights were off. They were sitting in total darkness and silence, save for the sound of the rain on the roof. Ben opened his eyes, his heart hammering against his ribs. He looked at Carol. She was pale, staring straight ahead, trembling. I think you need to get out of my car." "Honey," she said, her voice shaking. Right now, Ben didn't need to be told twice. He fumbled with the door handle, threw the door open, and scrambled out into the pouring rain. He didn't look back. He just ran down the street towards the faint glow of his neighborhood a few blocks away. When he finally dared to glance over his shoulder, the minivan was gone. There were no headlights, no engine sound, nothing. It had simply vanished. He never found out what happened to Carol or her minivan. The trip never registered in his Uber app. It was as if it never happened. To this day, Ben can't explain it. Was it a bizarre system glitch, a targeted hack, or something else entirely? He doesn't know, but he says the experience has made him seriously reconsider the lines between technology, reality, and the terrifying, scary true stories that can emerge when those lines begin to blur. Ben's story taps into a more modern fear, our reliance on technology and what happens when it turns against us. It's an unnerving thought that the systems we trust can fail in such a horrifying, inexplicable way. It leaves you wondering what was really in that car with him. Now, for our third story, we move from the supernatural to the sinister. This is a story about human evil and how quickly a situation can escalate when you realize you're trapped. It comes from a couple, Mike and Sarah, who were on vacation in a city they didn't know. They call this experience the silent partner. Mike and Sarah had just finished a late dinner in a trendy downtown district. It was the last night of their trip, and they were in high spirits. They decided to call an Uber to take them back to their hotel, which was about 15 minutes away. Their driver, a man named Leo, arrived in a spotless, high-end SUV. He didn't say a word when they got in. He just nodded and started the drive. The silence was a little awkward, but they figured he was just a quiet guy. They sat in the back, chatting about their dinner. A few minutes into the ride, Sarah noticed something odd. A dark-colored sedan had been behind them ever since they left the restaurant. It kept a steady distance, not too close, not too far. It could have been a coincidence, but made her feel uneasy. "Hey, Mike," she whispered, "is that car following us?" Mike looked back. "I don't know, maybe. It's a busy street." But as their Uber took a turn, the sedan followed. When they took another, it was still there. Leo, their driver, remained completely silent, his eyes fixed on the road, betraying no emotion. The doors were locked. The child lock was on. Sarah felt a knot of dread tighten in her stomach. She decided to test a theory. She pulled up the map on her phone. According to the GPS, they were going the right way. "Hey, Leo," she said, trying to sound cheerful. "We were just talking about maybe grabbing some dessert. Is there a good ice cream place around here?" Leo didn't answer. He didn't even look at them in the rearview mirror. He just kept driving, his expression like stone. Mike tried next. "Hey, man," she asked your question. "Can you hear us?" Still nothing. It was like they weren't even there. Now, both Mike and Sarah were genuinely scared. The sedan was still behind them. The driver was ignoring them. They were in an unfamiliar city, locked in the back of a stranger's car. This was no longer just a ride. It was a situation. They realized that their rideshare safety was not guaranteed. It was an illusion. Mike had an idea. He pulled up the Uber app and used the Share My Trip feature, sending their live location to his brother. He then typed a quick text. "Something is wrong with our Uber. A car is following us. Driver won't talk. Call police if we go off-route." Just as he hit send, Leo's phone, mounted on the dash, lit up. It wasn't a call or a text. It was a single, flashing red dot on a blank screen. Leo saw it, and for the first time, his expression changed. He glanced in the rearview mirror, his eyes meeting Mike's. There was no anger, no panic, just cold, calm acknowledgement. Then he reached over and slowly, deliberately turned his phone off. The car suddenly swerved, taking a sharp exit off the main road and heading towards a dark, industrial part of the city, a maze of warehouses and empty lots. The sedan followed, closer now. This was it. Their planned route was gone. This was an abduction. Sarah started to panic, pulling on the door handle. Mike stayed calm. Screaming won't help, he said, his voice low and firm. We need a plan. They were approaching a red light at an intersection. It was their only chance. As the SUV slowed to a stop, Mike did the only thing he could think of. He leaned forward and violently pretended to get sick, making loud, gagging noises. Oh my God, he's gonna be sick, Sarah screamed, playing along. Pull over. He's going to ruin your car. The sudden, visceral chaos seemed to momentarily rattle the stoic driver. He unlocked the doors, clearly more concerned about his pristine vehicle than their plan. Get out, he hissed, his first words of the entire trip. Mike didn't hesitate. He threw his door open, and he and Sarah tumbled out into the street. The sedan behind them screeched to a halt. A man got out of the passenger side, but Mike and Sarah were already running, sprinting across the intersection towards the relative safety of a gas station on the corner. They burst inside, yelling for someone to call 911. By the time the police arrived, both the SUV and the sedan were gone. The Uber account for Leo was found to be fraudulent, created with stolen information. The police believe they had stumbled into a sophisticated robbery or kidnapping ring that targeted tourists. Mike and Sarah were lucky to escape. They never found out what the silent partner in the car behind them had in store for them, and they don't want to. Mike and Sarah's story is a terrifying reminder that sometimes the danger isn't just one person. It's organized. The silence of their driver, the coordination with the other car, it paints a picture of a calculated, predatory operation hiding in plain sight on an app we use every day. Their quick thinking and refusal to freeze in the face of fear is what saved them. For our final story, we journey to the edge of civilization, where there's no cell service, no streetlights, and no one to hear you scream. It's a story about being completely and utterly at the mercy of the person driving. A man named David, an avid hiker, shared this. He calls it the longest mile. David had just finished a 3-day solo hike in a national forest. He had arranged for an Uber to pick him up from the remote ranger station at the trailhead and take him back to his motel in the nearest town, about an hour away. It was late afternoon, and the sun was already beginning to dip below the mountain peaks. His driver, a man named Hank, arrived in a beat-up, old pickup truck that looked like it had seen better decades. Hank was a rugged, weathered man in his 50s with a quiet, gruff demeanor. Given their location, David wasn't surprised. He threw his pack in the bed of the truck and climbed in. There was no cell service this deep in the mountains, so the GPS was useless. Hank seemed to know the winding mountain roads by heart. For the first 20 minutes, the only sounds were the rattling of the old truck and the crunch of gravel under the tires. David tried to make small talk. Been driving out here long? Long enough, Hank grunted, not taking his eyes off the road. The sun had now set, and the forest was cloaked in a deep twilight. It was beautiful, but also deeply isolating. They hadn't passed another car for miles. It was just them, the truck, and the endless trees. Suddenly, the engine sputtered. It coughed a few times and then died. Hank coasted the truck to the side of the narrow dirt road and turned the key. Nothing. He tried again. The engine just clicked. Damn it, Hank muttered, but he didn't seem surprised. He seemed almost resigned. She's dead. What do we do? David asked, a sense of unease creeping in. There's no service here to call for a tow. Hank was silent for a moment, staring out into the pitch-black woods. There's an old logging road about a quarter-mile back. Cuts through the woods. It's a shortcut to the main highway. I'll walk it and hitch a ride into town, send someone back for you in the truck. It sounded plausible, but something felt wrong. Why not just walk along the road they were on? Why cut through the dark woods? You just stay put, Hank said, opening his door. I'll lock up. Be back in a couple of hours. He got out, went to the back of the truck, and David heard him rummaging around. He came back holding the keys, and he had a small, heavy-looking canvas duffel bag slung over his shoulder. He locked David's door from the outside, then his own, and without another word, he walked back down the road, disappearing around a bend. David was alone. An hour passed, then two. The forest, which had been quiet, now seemed alive with sounds. The snap of a twig, the rustle of leaves, the distant hoot of an owl. Every sound made him jump. He was locked inside a dead truck in the middle of nowhere. After the third hour, sheer terror began to set in. Hank wasn't coming back. This wasn't a breakdown. It was a setup. But for what? Robbery? He had his wallet and phone. Why would Hank leave them behind? David decided he couldn't wait any longer. He found a tire iron under the seat and, after several frantic attempts, managed to smash the passenger side window. He climbed out, cutting his hand on the glass. He had a choice: walk the direction Hank went or continue down the road toward town. His gut told him to get as far away from Hank as possible. He started walking, using his phone's dying battery as a feeble flashlight. After walking for what felt like an eternity, he came to the bend where Hank had disappeared. He saw the faint outline of the logging road Hank had mentioned. Curiosity, mixed with a morbid sense of dread, got the better of him. He pointed his light towards the entrance of the path. He saw Hank's footprints in the soft dirt, but he saw something else too. Alongside the footprints was a long, deep groove carved into the earth. It was a drag mark. It looked as if Hank had been dragging that heavy canvas bag behind him, and the bag had been leaking. Small, dark droplets stained the ground along the trail, almost black in the moonlight. David's blood ran cold. He realized Hank wasn't going for help. He was going to dispose of something, or someone, and his plan had been to leave David locked in that truck as a potential witness, stranded for hours, maybe days, before anyone found him. David didn't wait to find out more. He turned and ran. He ran blindly down the dark mountain road, fueled by adrenaline and terror, not stopping until the first glimmers of dawn appeared on the horizon, and he finally stumbled into an area with cell service. The police found him on the side of the road, exhausted and incoherent. They investigated the site. The truck was there with the smashed window, but Hank, the canvas bag, and whatever was inside it were long gone. The Uber account was, once again, untraceable. David was the loose end in a story he was never meant to be a part of. He was just the ride, the alibi, the unfortunate witness to the aftermath of a crime he will never understand. These four stories, from the psychological to the sinister, all share a common thread, a moment where the ordinary becomes terrifying. They remind us that while technology can connect us, it can also create new avenues for our oldest fears to creep in. The trust we place in that app, in that driver, is immense. So please be safe out there. Share your trip with a friend. Check the license plate and the driver's name. And most importantly, trust your instincts. If something feels wrong, don't get in the car. If you're already in the ride and you feel unsafe, use the emergency features in the app, call for help, and do whatever you need to do to get to safety. Thank you for joining us for these unsettling stories tonight. If you found these accounts as chilling as we did, and you want to hear more content that explores the darker side of our modern world, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot. Stay aware and stay safe, because you never truly know who's behind the wheel.